This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hi guys, just dropping a voice note here to give a little bit of context to the upcoming voice notes. Me and Michael recorded a conversation about the 2005 documentary Commune, and after we were finished, we reached out to the director, Jonathan Berman, and he actually listened to our voice notes and did a director's commentary. This is so much to say on the voice notes itself. So throughout this conversation, you'll be hearing Jonathan interject with his comments and thoughts on the making of the documentary and in relation to our conversation. Just to clarify, he'll be the American voice you hear, sandwiched in between two Irish accents. Hope that makes sense.
Hey man, just wandering around the park now. Sun has just set. Lots of people out watching it. Gorgeous evening. I'll probably start turning rapidly dark now. I'll try and get this voice note in and make myself scarce. Just wanted to give you a little bit of context before I lead into this movie that I watched today. So what did I watch last night? What's it called? La Chimera, Italian film that was interesting, worth a watch. And towards the end of that film, one of the main characters and then a bunch of kind of like backgroundy characters, all who've been sort of struggling to find a place in the world, rearing kids in kind of like uncomfortable and difficult circumstances, all end up squatting a building and living together in this sort of communal space. I mean, literally all sleeping in the same room and stuff. And it's a subject matter that I have been somewhat exposed to and thought about a lot over the years, like that kind of communal living, especially with raising kids and stuff. And as soon as it comes up, it's an incredibly divisive subject, and it raises loads of questions about like children's well-being, but just like adults' well-being, mental health, blah blah blah, the pros, the cons, whatnot. And this morning, so I watched that last night. I was exhausted by the end of it and had a fairly early night. Thank be to God I had an early night, because my daughter is under the weather. She woke me up at 4:30 this morning. Tried to get back to sleep, but then she wanted to go to the toilet to puke, so that got me up at about 5:15. Took her downstairs so as not to wake the baby, and she, of course, immediately fell asleep on the couch beside me, which is always the way. She wakes me up and then she goes back to sleep for hours, and I can't go back to sleep. So I thought, prime moment is like 5:30 in the morning, not starting work for a couple of hours. Let me throw on this film, Commune, this documentary from 2005 that was sent our way recently. And it's about hippie communes, or not about hippie communes. It's about a hippie commune, which is quite interesting. I've probably seen more films about communes or hippie, or like, taking in like a bit of a, casting a wider net and taking an entire subject matter. And though this film gives you a lot, it gives you, snatches of the music scene of the time, snatches of like how other communes operated, snatches of like cult life, snatches of Vietnam, like little snatches that could have ended up being 5 minutes of the movie had the director chosen to like expand out the runtime. I respected that the film is pretty hyper-focused on this one commune.
Hello, Andy. Wow, what a cool format, which did short circuit my brain a bit. So yeah, listening to the pod, your voicemail, and yeah, the idea that there's snatches of their life. It's true. There's so much going on there that it's hard to go deep too much into any of the concepts. I just tried to stick with the story, but it does turn out to be, to use another like 60s concept, a whole Earth catalog or a catalog or encyclopedia of all the different ideas and movements from that era. Certainly could have gone deeper with the cult, but that's another story. We'll get to that soon.
Now, I think I probably have a bit of a different experience and interaction with this film than a lot of people would have. So my mother was born, I think, in 49. Hope I'm getting that right. So she's basically a child of the 50s. And although she's from like, conservative middle class background, middle of Ireland, Longford, like fucking like least hippie place on the planet, just because of the generation that she was from, I think any child of the 50s was exposed to like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Summer of Love. Basically, they came of age when the whole hippie movement happened. So for our generation, younger people, being a hippie is like more of a niche little thing, like being a goth or whatever. Whereas I think for a window of time, being somewhat involved in the hippie scene was, I'd maybe go so far as to say mainstream. I know obviously it's a countercultural movement, but for a certain age group, it was almost like maybe the norm. Now, of course, I wasn't alive at the time, so it might still have only accounted for like 20% or 30% of people, but it was huge. And it was one of the biggest youth movements or like cultural phenomena that certainly of the last 150 years, perhaps of all time. So although my mother never lived in a commune or went as deep into the hippie like world as the people in this film, I'm sure she would have had she been growing up in San Francisco or something. But I think growing up as a child of someone who'd been through that era, I have had more exposure to some of these ideas and lifestyles than a lot of people have, I would say. And so when I watch this film, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of people, you may be one of them. Certainly, I would say most people are of this position who would watch this film and be like, Jesus, this is really fucking out there, like living like this. This is so alien. This is like fucking, I can't, like, I've never seen the like sort of thing. Whereas I watch this and I'm like, I like, there's no new information in this. There's nothing here that is like, I've been in these spaces. I've been to hippie communes. I've been to places where everyone's naked and, drinking, like getting ladles, some communal soup pot and, everything like this. Of course, I'm much younger than these people. I'm from a different generation. So the film is set within that kind of hippie dream, summer of love, and then goes on into the sort of dying embers of that as the dream was fading. I was born years after that. So any exposure I've had to the hippie scene has been within this, it's like a very niche subculture that's keeping it alive or like endlessly committed to it. But still, the kind of the general sort of surface element of it remains the same. I'm sure the feeling of optimism and hope of a changing world is very different now, but the surface aesthetics of it and like kind of surface level activities that are being done are still, they still exist on Earth, and one can interact with them.
Yeah, so this whole thing about your mom that year around 49, that makes a lot of sense. You were kind of imbued in it. That was that post-war, yeah, maybe the beginning of the baby boom. I guess on the end. I was born in 62, don't tell anyone. So that was a unique generation, right? So many kids Not really crazy war, except of course Vietnam, which figures into the film. Um, so yeah, it definitely is related to the parents, which is why I'm glad that we had the kids of the commune in there too. Yeah.
So because of all this, I think I've had a lot more time than maybe casual viewers of this documentary would have had to ruminate on these ideas. Now, I know, I mean, I think my wife would be one person, but I think a lot of people would watch this and be like very, very disapproving of a lot, pretty much all of the the positions that people take, the activities, the basically attempt at designing a new life that goes on in this film. And there's plenty in this film where it goes out, in fact, almost all of it goes outside of my own comfort zone. Even just on a sort of hygiene level, I'm a little bit of a hygiene freak, a little bit. And I don't think you need to be much of a hygiene freak to sort of struggle to imagine yourself living in Black Bear.
Hey, yeah, and yeah, that whole thing about the cleanliness, I'm right with you. I couldn't do it if it was unclean. And Peter Coyote, who's a participant in the film, not a narrator, as he often does, he was the same way, which is why part of the reason that he was a visitor at Black Bear, more like a cousin. He had his own scene. That's the way he described it at Olima, which was another spot down the road, maybe more in Marin or something. And Peter was also into the cleanliness aspect of it. Okay.
I would say I'm pretty open-minded to the idea that the way that, and I know you are as well, the way that we live society, like it's kind of de facto arrangement of this is how humans should live, this is how couples should work, this is how families should work, this is how education should work, this is the goals that we should have, this is what, basically the whole package deal that you just are, opted into at birth. I have a skepticism for that. And whenever I see people challenging it, rather than thinking of them as reckless or like foolish, naive or whatever, I think of them as courageous, and their failings are not are not to be looked upon too harshly, because at least they're trying to do something different. And then when I look at, I've seen a lot of stuff about cults. I haven't seen that much stuff about communes. I guess because cults are like the sexier, more like sellable subject matter, so it's more likely to attract documentary filmmakers. This is literally just about a hippie commune, although there is a sort of a cult later in it, but by and large, it's about a hippie commune.
Hey, yeah, on the whole cult and commune front, yeah, well, there is, of course, the cult aspect to the film, but I think this was the first film, maybe Andy Timoner had one before it about her brother, that really deals with cults and communes, and certainly a communal living. Then there were a lot of great ones after, like, what's the name of that one about the Rajneesh? Yeah. Wild Wild Country. There you go. Okay, back to you soon.
When I see things like that, and it ultimately gets messed up because, I don't know, maybe like one of the, this isn't the case with this movie, but often it'll be like, well, some of the or one or two of the key ringleaders in the commune were actually ultimately committed some sort of sexual deviancy or something like that. It's like the people, I feel like when they watch these things, both in documentary form but also in real life, in the media and stuff like that, they're looking for their out. They're looking for their yeah, okay, now they're bad, so we can dismiss the whole idea out of hand. And for me, I think there is something there is something at the very least worth exploring, if not kind of proven to be virtuous, of communal living to some extent, like communal raising of children, communal. I mean, it's funny that is even in any way a radical position, seeing as all of human civilization until, the last 20 years or something was built on community. It's only now with like the internet and Uber Eats and everything like that we can like completely unshackle ourselves from coexisting with other humans, remote working and stuff like that. But basically, like, we've only got where we've got because we've sort of, it takes a village type attitude. And I think pushing that to a further extent, like when you see what happens in hippie communes, where it's like, we got a whole bunch of adults, we got a whole bunch of kids, we got a whole bunch of jobs to do, we got a whole bunch of pleasure to be had, and we're just gonna like make sure all those things are taken care of as best as possible. That kind of feels to me like what it would have been like in like a peasant village or something like that.
Yeah, just making some pasta here as I talk to you. It's because I'm heading out to show the film back in the home grounds of the Bay Area this weekend. But I love your point about the peasant village, and yeah, I've thought about that's really how people lived most of history. And in fact, I believe that children were treated as like full-on adults. Like you see from a couple hundred years ago in the UK, kids in like overcoats work in the fields like they're full-on adults, which was one of the bad ideas I think that came out of that era, that children have all the answers and we should treat them with respect and let them make full-on decisions. That's just a little zany, but again, they're coming out of the 50s and trying to break through the mental shackles of the era, McCarthyism, leave it to Beaverism. So, okay.
I do look at this kind of subject matter with somewhat rose-tinted glasses, but at the end of the day, it's humans involved, so it's going to be a fucking shit show at least on occasion, if not like to a significant extent. There's going to be bad actors. There's going to be, people who are like really, really good, admirable people who are flawed and have like shortcomings. And I think this film gives you like a pretty fair and unbiased smorgasbord of what commune life is like. I mean, it is probably a little. Now, I don't know, because obviously I haven't been to Black Bear Ranch. I don't know these people, so I don't know what's being left on the cutting room floor. It feels a bit of an endorsement. Like, it feels like maybe there are a few sharp edges shaved off. I suppose the main reason I have that suspicion is whenever there is something in the film that is these guys maybe dropping the ball on crucial well-being responsibilities when it comes to kids or each other or whatever, it's quickly passed by. It's not that it's like excused, but it doesn't linger on it. So I wonder, and it'd be interesting to find out, I wonder if this documentary filmmaker is, how enamored they are by this Black Bear Ranch. I think if I made this film and I spent like, hundreds of hours interviewing these people and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if I came away feeling like, this is a pretty positive thing. So let's do a pretty positive appraisal of it. But yeah, I'm not sure on that front. I don't know. I think that's kind of the what I'm going in with.
Yeah, I think you have a good point about the more of the dark side of it. Maybe I was a little embedded in their world, and as someone who grew up like kind of with my brothers and sisters, that level of understanding of the 60s, and sort of enamored with it to a degree too. I probably left out some stuff maybe that could have gone deeper into that, but I also think people didn't want to diss Black Bear. And the people, again, Mazzy, again, when you make a documentary, not again, but for the first time, you're choosing and selecting people. Like, we did interviews with a ton of people. Some were less interesting, and the ones who were more interesting tended to be positive. Aaron Marley, the son of the founders, Richard and Elsa, definitely says he's seen the dark side, and he's going to speak at some of our screenings. See if we can tape that. And, I want to hear more about the dark side for sure. The cult that comes along later in the film, there was more of them in there. But I guess we trimmed that because there was a reaction from Black Mirror. At this point in my life, I probably wouldn't be so likely to trim it, but it might have just, it kind of moves along at a brisk pace, I hope. And I'm like a Sam Fuller filmmaker, all about story, and like to keep it moving.
Now, I started watching this film, I was like, okay, this is kind of boring. Like, what's the point of this? Like, it feels almost like you're looking through like someone's home movies. You go over to someone's house and they sit you down with a photo album and this is when we went to Paris. And look, this is me in front of the Eiffel Tower. And then I was at Moulin Rouge. You know Moulin Rouge? Yeah, this is me. Like how uncompelling it is just seeing events that you weren't there for that a bunch of people did. Like that, it had a bit of that, stink in the early moments. I was like, am I really going to fucking give a shit about this movie? Because I know that people formed hippie communes. They were all over the place back then. I know what they did. I know they all got naked. I know that they made food communally. I know that they, had free love. And I know what their attitude was on the Vietnam War. And so, it felt a little bit rote to me at the beginning. But I settled into it and I went, you know what? Really, all this film is doing is just trying to get to everyone and get it's a oral history in a way. And the access is incredible in this film. I think now, of course, there could have been like very, very key members of the Commune that refused to speak, but their presence isn't really felt in the film in terms of like strategic editing. But it feels like a complete package. I guess that's because nothing particularly bad happened. Like it wasn't like the whole place got shut down in some sort of like sex scandal and half of them are in prison, like some big FBI investigation. It was just like, it was a fairly self-contained little commune. They weren't doing, so-called terrorist acts or like dealing drugs or there wasn't really any scandal there. So I guess for that reason, it's relatively easy to get all of the pertinent characters back on camera again. And I really liked that.
So the whole thing about not being anything bad, I don't know if I'd agree with that because the cult comes along and challenges everything they do. But yeah, it definitely is an oral history. I think for people who don't know a lot about the era, it's gonna ring more new, Yeah. All right.
I as I said, I've grown up a couple of generations removed from this scene. So I've grown up in an era of seeing all of the hippies just working regular jobs and just like going to the supermarket and like they did their thing. Maybe they were out they were following some guru in India back in the day, but now they're just like, going to the dentist. Like that is very familiar to me. And I think this film, it's nice that it's set in that way, because I think if it was just purely archive footage and it was entirely about the Black Bear Ranch, it would be more alienating. And because half the film, at least, I mean, I didn't measure it, but it feels like about half the film is set in the present day about all these people who went through this wild lifestyle. But you know what? They're okay. Even the girl who got separated from her parents, deliberately, which you could say, and went off with I forget the name of that cult, but went off to India, and then before you know it, she's back down the street. Oh, my daughter, what are you doing here down the street? Like, even she's just like incredibly well adjusted. And I think that's the litmus test for me. Sometimes I've seen these hippie organizations. This film is a perfect example, but they've seen it elsewhere, and you go, well, that's questionable. Well, that seems suspect. Well, that seems problematic. Well, that seems dangerous. Have they really thought about everything when they're doing that? And then you look at the product, the people who are coming out of it, like the children who were raised in it, or the adults that spent, a decade in it, and they're almost always just like the loveliest, nicest people. And you go, well, that's got to fucking count for something, and again, this is a documentary. It's edited. It has every opportunity to paint a rose-tinted picture of this troupe of players, but I bought it because I've just seen it so much in real life. So I think if you look at people who were raised in normal society, like, kind of not Rage Against the Machine and striking out on their own and just kind of like doing what everyone in this movie would have been doing had they not left their hometown. Well, those people are, they're probably much in a much worse state mentally, emotionally, psychologically than people who've gone through this kind of lifestyle, at least in my experience. I'm definitely not going to claim to be some sort of like expert anthropologist or something, but I think the more exposure I have to this kind of subject matter, the less judgment, I suppose, I have of it. So yeah, I liked the film. I guess I've talked more about the subject matter itself than the film directly. I think the characters in it are interesting. Whenever we caught up with a new person, I liked getting the glimpses of them in the present day. I liked getting a sense of what they were younger. We've seen this in a lot of fiction films as well, that dance between like, okay, this was the young dreamer, this was the young version of this person. Where have they settled on in life? I really enjoy getting the opportunity, especially in a very short film like this, to see both sides of that coin. I will say that there is so many people in this film, and most of them aren't greatly consequential to like some sort of bigger power structure or arc. I guess that's the nature of a commune, that they all sort of are interchangeable. It's not like, well, here was the boss, here was the second in command, here was the guy that disagreed with the second in command, here's the guy that started it's not like they all have some sort of big narrative heft that that weighs upon one another and therefore kind of constructs them into a film narrative. It's much more of a like, we're going to just constantly be showing you a new person, a new voice. And they often have something interesting to say. And at the end of the day, I think the big takeaway is like, they had this wild adventure. I mean, we all had a wild adventure in our youth, but like, this is obviously on the wilder side. But now they're just people kind of moving through life like we are. They're a bit older than we are currently, but they are just like, I have ideas, I have friction with regular society. I also don't want to spend my whole life pontificating on like sociology. I want to just kind of like be happy and enjoy my kind of day to day. And so ultimately the people come away as, pretty relatable. And yeah, that's kind of like left the film with a good taste in my mouth, I would say. So it'd be interesting to see what you think of it. I think with a film like this, there isn't really, and I appreciate this actually, it's not a documentary that's really trying to contrive events or people into basically genre filmmaking. A lot of the time you watch documentary and it's like, well, they've either gone in from the offset or at the very least they've started the edit going, how can we push this as close to being a story, like a generic story as possible. This film hasn't done that. This film is basically a genuine history. It's not exhaustive history. You can make like probably like a mini series about this commune, but it's a pretty good little like bottling up of this commune. It doesn't really try and take in other communes and the whole era, and I think that's good. But I think I don't want to say the negative of that, because I actually don't feel negatively about this whatsoever, but the negative, if you will, of that is there isn't really that much to this film other than these were all these people that lived in that place, and this is what that place was like. I mean, that is literally all that this film has to offer, and I think that's plenty for me. I think had this film in 2 hours, it would have really struggled to like have it not having more up its sleeve. But yeah, I went in kind of feeling like I wouldn't like it. I didn't particularly like it for the first 10-15 minutes or so, and then every time a new person popped up, I was like, I'm interested in what you're saying, I'm interested in your experiences. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm just interested in this subject matter to an extent, and if you're not interested in it, then you don't really have much to work with on a filmmaking level. But I guess maybe that will be revealed in your response to this voice message, because I don't recall you ever really talking about communes or of like experimental ways of living and stuff. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the film struck you.
Yeah, I think 20 minutes in here, I think we really lucked out with this group, because community, because they are interesting and they have gone on to do cool things. Yeah. God, I had something else to say, but I forgot. Oh, right, the now and then aspect of it. Yeah, we lucked out also. There's that hippie synchronicity happening, I suppose, here. In that Elsa was like, oh, you should call this guy who was traveling around with an early video camera. So that's how we got that really cool black and white footage of them as, 20-somethings, which really helps for that now and then and gives you almost an emotional connection to them that you wouldn't have if they were just old, saggy hippies. You see them when they were young and vibrant, and then you see them now. And, it's been said before that this place in Black Bear was kind of a school for a lot of people. But Elsa was like, yeah, there's this guy who's traveling around with a video camera. It turned out it was Portapak, the first video format. And we found one of the last players. They had it in San Francisco at the Bay Area Video Coalition, and we were able to rescue that material. And when we got all the tapes in from that black and white grainy footage, we were crestfallen because we hardly saw any of Black Bear in the many, many hours. There were some amazing American Indian ceremonies that actually should go to the Smithsonian or something. But it turned out there were about 15 minutes maybe of Black Bear people, but that was enough. I mean, in a film, it's a highly condensed, and it allows you to see them back in their youthful prime. In terms of, meeting all the different people and then not having this kind of narrative heft like you might see in a story like Wild Wild Country, which I recommend. This was partially because Black Bear was like this totally anarchist group, as you see in the film. They weren't exactly mellow hippies. They were benign, mostly anarchists. So everybody had a different take on everything. To this day, like when I'm now dealing with them to bring people to the screenings, it's like herding cats. They're each a very strong-minded group, and I'm glad about that. But therefore, it's almost necessarily not tangential, but diverse, very different perspectives on what utopia is, right? So you see that in the film as well. Yeah, the part about the people being older than we are, that's one of the weird things about film. It kind of like turns us into like bugs that are under a glass, and we stay ageless. And they are ageless to me, so it's weird because I'm talking on the phone with some of the Black Bear people about coming to screenings, and they're like, I'm old, but they sound the same. So it's going to be odd because 20 years later, when they started at like 60 or close to that, you know, time waits for no one. Is that how it goes? Or time spares no one? Something like that. So, yeah. Yeah, as far as the storytelling goes, there is a beginning, middle, and end in the film. But I appreciate that you noticed that. When I make my films, and this is one of them, I try to let the footage talk to me rather than impose an idea on it. Otherwise, you wind up with like these horrible narrated documentaries. And I come from the tradition out of New York where you don't have a narrator. And yeah, let the footage talk to you and see what happens. But there's still the beginning. They go up to the woods to find utopia. The middle, they have to deal with it. In the end, the cult comes along and people eventually leave and all that. So that's the deal. When we were making the film, I was pretty clear that we had to go deep on one place, and this was a great place to do that rather than doing like a real surface era thing with a bunch of places. Then it would have been really scattered and, not compelling. So thanks for noticing that. Yeah, before we go to your, oh my God, don't wolf your food, co-host, I'd have to say that probably the whole nuclear living, the nuclear family situation, that's the experimental way of living. As you said, this is like the traditional way everybody lived. Okay, maybe not with the drugs and all that. All of that was also a part of indigenous people's society for sure. So I just thought that was intriguing, that the nuclear family, the whole 50s thing, that was the wild experiment. Even in the turn of the century, most people had their grandparents and stuff at home. I'm not sure how it is overseas, but Americans are really into like shipping off their old elders to facilities and stuff like that. Kind of sucks, but I can understand both sides of that equation. Okay.
Hey man, just in the park now for my second day in a row running, having my coffee, enjoying the sunshine and the freshly cut grass saga. And I've noticed for the second day in a row, there's a guy going around here foraging, and he has all sorts of knowledge that I don't, from things that look like a bunch of either dead plants or poisonous berries, what to eat and what not to eat. And I think he's got a tent hidden at the entrance of the park that I noticed today as well. But yeah, I think with this movie, this documentary, we're very used of getting put with the latest sensation of a documentary these days, and there's such a narrative driven story focus. Even though it's a documentary, it uses hybrid techniques of thrillers and all these things, or drama, romance. We're used to documentaries like that coming into focus, and I think this documentary, as you said, it will come down to whether you like the subjects and you're interested in the subject. And I think with it, I think it's probably something that I would have on, or sorry, rather my dad would have on in the background for something like the History Channel. And if you're not interested in what's being said, the documentary wouldn't visually strike you in any way, and the talking would become background noise almost. It feels like that on the surface if you're perhaps watching from a corner of a living room if you're not interested. Thankfully, I think, regardless how you feel about the Commune and the subject matter, I think this is always a very interesting subject, and the characters in this documentary are always fascinating to listen to. So I think sometimes for a documentary, all you need is a camera, an inquisitive mind, being able to let people talk, and it will do what it needs to do.
Yeah, hello, co-host. I'm sorry, I don't recall your name, but I agree. I think, I noticed this with the reviews. It's 80% of it is, does the person like the subject matter? 20% of it might be the filmmaking or not messing up the story or the filmmaking. But yeah, I would agree with that. It's all about the subject. I noticed with the reviews, when I heard that Stephen Holden at the New York Times was going to review it, I was really worried because he had dissed my first film about the Russian baths in New York, another kind of submerged society, maybe a little more literally. But he had dissed that. He later told me, I don't know if he was saying this for real, but I think so, that he just couldn't go with the kind of aesthetic of the fat guys in the Russian bath. And he had come from a first openly gay critic at the Times, and was much more into the whole, trim aesthetic. But turns out Stephen Holden was a hippie and liked hippie life. So there you go. He liked the subject matter. He liked the film. We got a glowing review in the Times, and that certainly didn't hurt for the initial release. But I have to say, on the initial release, the film was, in 2005, was more of a curio. It wasn't as important. And right now, with what's going on in America, I feel like it's much more important, between corporations taking over our rent rolls and our rent being jacked up and doubled and tripled, and the authoritarianism in the United States right now, and other countries for sure, like Hungary, that this is super, super relevant as giving people alternatives. My dog is agreeing.
I think whether you're somebody who disapproves of this lifestyle and you think it's akin to a cult, because you mentioned cults, there's probably people who watch this documentary or hear about this lifestyle, and to them that is a cult, just because it's outside the realms of standard society, I suppose. And then there's people like me and people like you, and I guess you're right, we never had a conversation about this, really. I love hearing about all these alternative lifestyles, and I'm constantly watching things about alternative lifestyles. Even on my algorithm on YouTube or something like that, I'll get something about this guy who's investigating this society in Wales that's cut off from the rest of the world. And there's these people, I think it was maybe Bristol actually, who they live in this building. I think it's an old bus station or something. I might be wrong. It might not be Bristol. And the government or the council are trying to cut them down, or kick them out, should I say, because it's health and safety. So there's this constant clash between ideals and ways to live. And I've been looking at a lot of off-grid living lately. I'm obsessed with it. And people get out their buses. People buy land in Wales or Scotland and they build a house. And even they're not allowed to build a house how they want and live how they want without the government interfering, even if it's their own land, even if they spent money on it. So I think that's crazy. And there was a time just before COVID where, certainly not commune living, but I had identified a place in Bulgaria where I could buy a cheap house in a cheap piece of land and I could just basically be isolated from modern society. I like seeing people who've taken a shot at something different. And obviously, the backdrop of this is the Vietnam War. People were very anti-government. I think it reached a height from probably the 50s and whatnot. And like you said, not to say that hippie culture was mainstream, but it was certainly a massive movement. So I like all that. And I would even go as far as to say, as I sit here in London, that city living on a mass scale, this is basically where I live now, is akin to a mega city in Judge Dredd. It's just unnatural to me. Now, there's always that argument in anthropology, whatever happens is natural, but it doesn't mean it's natural to how a species have evolved socially and even genetically. For instance, when I first came over here from Ireland, small village, I was constantly getting involved in people I saw that were in distress or trouble. I would have a time to talk to a homeless person or help an old lady carry her bags. And then after a while, that was just too much constant mental and emotional strain. So after a while, you ignore it. Remember, Louis C.K. had a joke where his friend was coming from out of town and she saw a homeless person and she was trying to help. And they were all looking at her like, oh, no, that's just a homeless person. What are you doing? What are you doing? And they were the ones that were crazy by seeing a person and thinking it was normal. So with this type of living, in one way, I think it's more natural than living in a city, for sure. I think that is not good for society. I think for social engagement, social living, it needs to be a lot smaller in order to have a thing called a community.
Yeah, the whole thing about, getting out of the city and fleeing to Bulgaria. First of all, I want to apologize for every American, not every, but many going to overseas because maybe they see some writing on the wall and getting new citizenships and moving out of the country. I apologize to Europe. Hopefully they're being good citizens and getting into the local culture. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, the whole city living trip, I remember somebody at Black Bear, P.D. Brucker, who's not in the film, who wound up being really a great guy helping the area with the salmon runs and preserving the river there, working with the tribes. PD said to me at one point, he's like, oh yeah, you live in the city. You guys just, you look at each other. That's what you do there. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of right. In New York City, you really don't need to go to anything. Just sit outside if it's nice out and just watch people go by or walk around. And then it's endlessly entertaining. Better than any movie for me. Maybe not any movie, but okay.
And I think what documentaries like The Commune and alternative living show sometimes, where people try and build a community. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit different, and not to say it's a little bit impure, because that's not what I mean. But what I mean is, if you're a hunter-gatherer, if you're hundreds of years ago, if you're a peasant, like you said, that situation has befallen you naturally, right? That's where you grew up. That's just where you're from. When people try and make a community like this, I feel like it's as much a social experiment as anything. because you were trying to manufacture a feeling and manufacture a community and manufacture a cohesive spirit based on an idea. And fair play to you for putting that idea into practice. I think it's great. And we certainly get to see it unfold through talking heads, the essence of human nature at times in this documentary. And like you said, any subject and person who appears on this documentary, I'm always happy to hear what they have to say, and they always have something to say. And obviously the documentary has archival footage that puts you in the frame of what it was like to live there. All the orgies, the naked people, the way of living, and hearing the people reflect on it and talk about it years later. As you mentioned, now this person works here, this person has their own house, and they're just much more what would be called acceptable members of society by the mainstream now. They weren't scared from it. They didn't have to go to cult decontamination, where they have to get somebody out of the mind of this fucked up place. It's not like that. They just live differently, and that's it. But I think because the movement and community had to be set up, had to be manufactured, and crucially to lives from the past or peasants and whatever, you always have the option to leave. And I think that changes the psychology of something like this, that is a little bit different as well. I really enjoy grappling with, and I really like just seeing human nature under these circumstances as well. People have a similar idea, a similar sense of idealism, and a similar sense of values on paper. Oh, we're not going to be conformed to a relationship. Oh, we're going to get away from government. We're going to get away from rules. We're going to do what we want. And then what things like this reveal is, not to say there's some universal truths or anything like that, but there's certain things that perhaps that you feel from the society you left were put in place to suppress people actually happen naturally. And these people discovering these things naturally from setting up their own society while leaving another society, and the things that stick and the things that they were able to shackle off and the things that they were able to explore and the different conclusions that they come to, I think is really good. For instance, the free love movement where everyone was having sex with a different person, and one of the characters says, oh well, there was a rule put in place that you could only have sex with the same person 2 nights in a row. And then there was someone else who said, yeah, couples were discouraged. We didn't want couples. So on the one hand, you come here to break away from society and have a free-for-all and do what you want. But then these things start to be put in place to suppress human nature in a way. And you can debate all day whether monogamy is good for people and whether it works. But what you can't deny is that people on some level gravitate towards monogamy when they find someone they love. A lot of the times, I'm not saying there's not plenty of people out there, maybe as much as 50% too, are happy with an alternative to that. And I'm not even saying that monogamy works, because there's 50% of divorces on top of that. But I feel like to start off on a premise that there's not going to be couples, that there's not going to be a relationship in that sense, and then I have to put things in place to discourage something that's natural, is just shows human nature in itself. And on top of that, when people started having feelings for somebody, they start getting jealous, and they're grappling with that, because the idea is that they can have sex with whoever they want. I like seeing another playing field for human nature to be explored, and I like seeing a conflict with human nature when they're really open-minded and grappling with the fact that maybe they're not open-minded in certain ways.
Yeah, I think as far as an idea, the only idea that they had at Black Bear was kind of a slogan: free land for free people. So that is the strength of it, in that people all came there for totally different reasons. So a lot of these communities that you might be able to build a stronger narrative for, in a way, where it's like a religious thing that, of course, they ultimately become the leaders having sex with everybody, and they've got a basement full of weapons and God only knows. But that wasn't the case here. Now, some people showed up who, this is not in the film, unfortunately, because one guy was like a hermit. He was a writer, and he lived off in a cabin, and it was amazing. I don't think we weren't able to film him, but he was amazing. He actually had weaponry. I mean, there's the country. Yeah, and that whole thing about the city as this kind of manufactured space that's not natural. So there was a lot of strength in the idea of this kind of benign anarchy. And then that Richard Marley, who had been very socially progressive, his father was one of the first people shipped out of the U.S. back, I think, to the U.K. For being a full-on troublemaker, communist type. He was a organizer. Richard and Elsa were able to hold it in a way that was loose, and people didn't necessarily listen, but there was a very, very loose structure and a very, very loose plan, which was free land for free people, and then another slogan, 99% free, which I think it might have come from the original Diggers, if not the San Francisco Diggers. Original Diggers, I believe, were over in England. Yeah, one of the things about all these ideas at Black Bear is it was like a laboratory. And it's still running, by the way. If people want to go hit the woods, you just have to email them now. You can't just show up, because there have been some cases where people have shown up who've just been bad apples. So you just want to know a little bit about who you are. But the movements, they came and went. So maybe 1 or 2 months, it's free love. And then, next month, it's we're all going to eat meat. So there was this whole thing of movements which become trends, which often eventually get commercialized. An example is this idea of just eating natural foods, which, yeah, it had been around in the 20s. I know there was a whole kind of utopian vegetarian movement back then, but and it came on full force in the 60s, and then became a trend, and then became a movement, a trend, and then gets usurped, of course, by the mainstream. And you have Whole Foods and places like that. By the way, guys, don't go to Whole Foods. Go to your local co-op. Go to your farm. If you're in the city, there's farmers markets. Okay, that's my preaching. Hey guys, I really appreciate you watching the movie. I'm really thinking about it so deeply. It's really wonderful. Yeah, the whole thing with monogamy and that is, another issue, again, coming out of the 50s and all that. I think you're probably right on the 50-50 thing. This idea that, I think on one hand, my initial thought is, it's men who want to have the whole free love thing, right? Free love. But and in reality, women have a lot of fantasies as well, and some of which they make a reality. There was that book, The Secret Garden, which is worth a read. It was from the 60s, and it really gets into some crazy fantasies. Now, today, you have, I think, a lot more codified and varieties on gender and relationship. There's a lot of open relationships and kitchen table polygamy and all that kind of stuff. Carry on.
And then there's another type of thing as well that's certainly happened with societies that we see in this movie, where it's an old expression, but as you know all too well, children changes things, right? Children changes how you act, what you want, what your motivations are. So in this, when children come into the picture after a while, because obviously they document the years that this place is open, and people now almost put their initial ideology and their initial preferences, it shifts when they have kids. And that's what happens in the society that they left as well. And a lot of people left, a lot of people wanted their children to have more. And I liked all that. And yeah, I like the history of the different times there when that other cult, I don't know if it's actually a cult, is it the Shiva Limas? They look like a wacky bunch of characters, especially where we hear the guy, the leader, we hear him, his voice. So I don't know if he died or if what happened to him, but he just sounds like the dodgiest guy ever. And then it's mentioned, oh yeah, they just worship children.
Yeah, here around minute 42, you're talking about the Shiva Lila. He's at a cult. It's a wacky boy. That ain't a cult. I don't know what is, because, yeah, I mean, a very charismatic leader. He has a very regimented set of ideas, which involved dropping acid with the children. I don't think they gave it to the children. That's my understanding. But yeah, and it turns out, you want to know what happened to Gridley Wright, the leader. He apparently had some karmic debt, if you believe in that kind of stuff, and was knifed apparently in a youth hostel in Europe. Maybe, or was it Southeast Asia? But he got into some kind of altercation, and for whatever reason, somebody knifed him and he died from those wounds. That's my understanding of Gridley Wright and the Shiva Lila cult. I did try to treat those folks who were brave enough, who were in that organization, to be in the film. I thought that was pretty admirable of them. As best I can, and to have empathy. You know, Wakan, who's the guy you meet, who's from the Shiva Lila group, he had been over in Cambodia killing women and children and men and wanted to make amends, as he says. So he came back and just went a little too far by joining this group. Their idea coming from a kind of encounter group, confrontation group, Fritz Perls, all that kind of therapy that's more confrontational than it is soothing. And there's some validity to that kind of work, but you have to have the other people involved agreeing. And they just showed up, and there was no like, hey, we're going to play kind of a game with you guys and push your buttons and bring you to the other side. There was no agreement on that's what was going to happen. And so it did turn out to be pretty fraught with emotion, with one person in parents who was like, no, they should stay here. And the other person was like, no, our child should go off to India and discover a better world. So that's pretty heavy. And you see it through that one story.
Yeah, a lot to enjoy about this documentary. A lot to sink your teeth into, philosophically as well, which I liked. And yeah, like you, to begin with, 5 or 10 minutes in, I'm thinking, okay, what's the story here? Which is how we're trained to see documentaries in much more modern times, I suppose, in the last 5-6 years. But the story is you're just spending time with people and hearing their stories and just enjoying that. And I think that's where the strength of this documentary is.
Hey man, Friday morning here. Just I got an enormous amount of sleep last night for the first time in a long time. I think got about 8 hours. So I'm just operating on another heightened spiritual plane of existence right now. Floating through my day, getting ready for the weekend. Nice hearing your thoughts on the movie there. I think we had a quite similar experience with this one. Yeah, you're right. It is a film that comes down to your interest in the subject matter. I think it's not a particularly stylized documentary. It's not like a great story in terms of like that sort of, like King of Kong, all those documentaries that are like, well, everyone who watches this is going to be drawn into this like edge of your seat narrative. So if you're interested in this subject matter, then I think this is a really, really good film to watch because A, I just think like it captures this commune quite well, but B, thinking about it, it's really one of the only films I've ever seen about this subject matter. And I'm talking about like isolated communities, whether it's cults or communes or however you want to put it, that isn't ultimately about why this doesn't work. This is a film that, if it is biased in one direction, it's kind of feels to be in favor of this commune, of this experiment, and comes down on the side of this having been largely successful. But at the very least, it's unbiased. It's not going, these things are destined to fail because, it's all well and good. Like, communism itself, there you go. It's all well and good when it's a manifesto on paper, but, before you know it, it's death squads and people being lined up against walls and shot and stuff like that. Like, this is like not making the claim that on a broad societal level, things need to change. It isn't a piece of activism, this documentary. It's literally just going, here is one commune. Here's how it went down. Here are the people that like now in the 2000s that were a part of this. And that places it as quite a unique work, I would say. At least in my experience. I mean, there's probably other documentaries out there. I haven't like gone out my way to watch stuff about communes, but in terms of stuff that's come across our desk, I think this is refreshingly optimistic about the subject matter.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is Jonathan Berman, the filmmaker, by the way. I worked with a couple of editors and a co-producer and all kinds of people. Of course, the Black Bear Ranch. And yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about it, but this is a story about one that kind of worked. But I'm hoping that people are able to kind of draw from it and see that it's really kind of a story about an era and some of the wins that we don't talk about because they just got submerged, or we just assumed that era was all dirty, crazy stoned hippies. But as we see here, it really wasn't always like that. So I'm glad, and I hope that people are able to take that to the next level and see that it's really a story of an era and some of the excesses and some of the wins, many of the wins which we never really considered. So that it's iconic, totemic, whatever it is, about 60s and 70s counterculture, which I think that people today who are younger might want to know about.
You raised the question of what is a cult. I mean, this is a question I've come back to, forever. Obviously, we were raised in a, Irish Catholic area. And by area, I mean the country of Ireland. So I kind of grew up butting heads with that infrastructure. Certainly not to the extent I would have had I been born a couple of decades earlier, but still, I remember growing up and first learning about cults, about like Jim Jones and all that, and then going, well, why are these major religions not a cult? What is a cult? Is it the size of it? Is it like you reach a certain critical mass and you're no longer a cult because you are the the status quo, you are the mainstream, and a cult, it has to be something standing in opposition to that. Is it a cult? Like you said, a lot of people would look at these guys and say that it is a cult, and maybe it is, but it's like cult is in the eye of the beholder. It's kind of like terrorist or something, where, depending on who's looking at it, observing it, they're going to label it a cult or not. I think one thing that sort of comes into it has got to be like how dogmatic it is. As you mentioned, there are rules here. They're mentioned briefly. I mean, they're not brushed under the carpet as such in this documentary, but they're not lingered on, and certainly there's no dissection of how they may have been problematic for certain parties. It feels a little bit of a written by the victors kind of narrative. It feels like it could be that, because you've got 100 people living in a commune and you've got various rules, which there are within my house of only 4 people. We have rules about like bedtime is this time, and we don't let this to like every single time you get a group of people living together, whether it's a city or a household or it's literally just a couple living in a house, you're going to establish rules. They're not like, you're not necessarily ruling with an iron fist and having punishments if the rules aren't met, but you have like guidelines, and like these are our values that we want to follow. So I think it's impossible for people to live together without any form of dogma, but it is inevitable in a place where it's like adults, free people coming together, in great quantities, that some people are going to push back on the rules that exist. And they talk about like votes when they're talking about whether to kill the cow or to keep the cow and stuff like that. Like there's clearly an attempt to be like open-minded and compassionate to like different voices. But I have to imagine that over the probably hundreds of people that passed through the doors of Black Bear, that there have been people who've been like, there's been a conflict there, and they're like, not for me, and maybe have directly challenged the rules. And maybe that's, none of that's really here in this documentary. It feels like it's been quite a gentle and natural experience for the people until the Shiva guys turn up, which is interesting because the Shiva people, we get a few ex-Shiva members interviewed in it. They clearly still feel that they were a bit blindsided by the banishing, but it feels like the documentary is on one side. And if this documentary was made by someone who befriended the Shiva people and be like, wasn't perfect, but like, these are all of the good and positive parts of that many years experience of the Shiva Leelas or whatever it's called, that they might depict the Black Bear episode differently. So you're not quite sure what's getting cut out and what's kind of, an earnest attempt to accurately depict what life was like here. But it is interesting, like thinking about the nature of a cult and what is a cult. And I think it's more or less a useless term. It's kind of is a scaremongering term. It's a term it's basically a tool to dismiss and vilify a bunch of people. I think all the stuff you said about like, going out and living off the grid and stuff, that is compelling. I'm not going to say everyone's thought about that, because obviously there's loads of people who are just like, I am naturally drawn to just living in a city, living in a completely like fully articulated structure that I don't have to worry about. There's a council set up. There's a law enforcement apparatus. There's a whole engine that's being done for me, and that I feel a certain amount of faith in, and that gives me a sense of security, so forth. And that's just how they want to live. But maybe it's just because the circles I've moved in and stuff are like the people I'm drawn to. But I've always just interacted with people who feel drawn to detaching from the establishment, at least to some extent. And I suppose, even if you live in the like central London, you can detach from some extent, because you can detach philosophically, and you can detach in terms of like certain life behaviors and stuff. And then obviously the extreme end of that is like you're moving out to like northern Canada and you're just in a log cabin or something and you never even see people. And, you know, between those two extremes, there's you know, a lot of people are kind of living their lives somewhere along that line. But it is compelling. And I like how this film, there's one of the more interesting statements. I forget the name of basically every character in this movie, but I forget the name of the gentleman who says this particular observation. He goes, people thought we were up there kind of like pontificating on, you know, spirituality and ways of looking at the world and politics and all this kind of stuff. It's like every waking second living out there, more or less, is, well, not every waking second, but an enormous amount of your time is survival. If you're going to actually genuinely try and go outside of society into the wilderness, like granted, it helps having a large number of people, but you need to chop wood. You need to basically, it's a grind. You know, obviously we know this from history, people living rurally, throughout history. It was you know, you were laboring in the fields, you were planting, you were growing, stuff like that. And that's what they were up to. It feels like they wanted to leave the world to an extent. Obviously there is people going back and being involved with like the Black Panthers and stuff like that. But most of what we see in this movie is like people who want to leave the world and build their own like better functioning society. And that's like incredibly challenging just on like a physical labor level. So I think I liked the sort of demystifying of commune life a bit, that like if they make a movie of this, it's probably not going, I mean, a fiction movie set around this subject matter, I don't think you're going to come away feeling like mostly it's just about like survival, you know, physical survival. And then at the end of the day, you know, you've done all of your hard labor, like putting up barns and building structures and stuff like that. And then you can all have sex and play bongos and have you know, food and have a good time. But that seems to be the majority of what they were occupied up there, which is, you know, I think just a different narrative, I suppose, than what you would get in most fiction films about the subject matter. Also, you talked about how there's a difference between actually genuinely living in this experience like people have throughout history because they were forced into it. They're born into like a small remote village in Poland or something like that, compared to artificially creating this experience. And that's something I've thought about a lot over the years. Like, how different is that on an experiential level, on a sort of worldview, sort of philosophical level of like, let's say you're born into this world where you don't have some massive media state breathing down your neck, getting into your business everywhere. You are just born into something that's, the lifestyle is quite similar to Black Bear Ranch, which, you know, I would imagine probably most people were born into that 1,000 years ago. So that's one thing. But knowing, let's say for us right now, if we went out and did something like that, and then we're like sat there on a ranch and be like, oh, that new David Fincher movie's just come out in the cinema. Maybe shall I head into town and watch that? And it's like, you've kind of got your one foot in both worlds. But I don't think that these guys ever make the claim that they're like they're like one for one communing with some other thing. They're just trying to do what they're doing, and they are genuinely building something that is very real. And obviously people have done this forever, with like some people have just been born into a status quo and they've lived that for their whole life. But you know, throughout history and in the modern day, people constantly build a new life for themselves that's very different from what they would have what would have happened had they just not done that. So that is also like a very human experience. But yeah, I remember when I traveled for like 10 years, backpacked and hitchhiked and stuff like that. And I remember initially it was incredibly thrilling. I had a great time. And then after a while, I was like, oh, I really, really enjoy being in these places, being in, like, seeing the world, like, you never know where you're going to be next, all that kind of stuff. And it was just so much of it was so stimulating. But what I was lacking was a purpose, like a reason to be traveling. My reason for travel was just for travel's sake. And I started to crave, what I really was enamored by was like old stories about people going on adventures because they had to like get to something. I was like, oh man, it would be so cool if like, and this is, don't take this on face value because obviously I appreciate that the actual reality of this would have been horrible. But I was like, what if like someone went missing and I had to find them, and all I knew is that they were like in South America somewhere, and I'm like going from village to village, like showing people photos and like picking up pieces of information. That kind of difference between I have to do this and I'm getting all of the incidental brilliant experience out of it, but it is important that it gets done, versus I'm just doing this for the sake of it. And I don't know what sense of purpose I'm sure everyone felt a different sense of purpose. We got people who were sort of trying to dodge the draft. We got people who are just incredibly alienated by regular society and want something different. We've also got, just young people like, this looks interesting. I remember going to hippie commune in Spain, quite a very, very long one. It's been running for decades and decades, and spent a few days there. And it was not for me. It was something I found very uncomfortable. And they all differ. So I would never go to one and go, that's what hippie communes are like. Like they're entirely the product of like what's gone on there and what those people are like that set it up, and what the people that are currently operating it are like and stuff like that. But I was very much exposed to dogma that I didn't like there, and the people were, I guess, living there with an intentionality of like, this is important to kind of establish this. So yeah. I guess that it is gone over in the documentary that people do talk about like why they were drawn to it, but they're drawn to it for a bunch of different reasons. And then now they've been drawn into their current lives for all of their various different reasons and values. So it's a gentle, free-flowing movie. And you come away, or I come away from this film feeling like there wasn't anything too oppressive or dark, either in the foundation of it or in the operating of it or in the detaching from it. Like, it all seems to have been quite a positive experience, and the people all seem quite nice. We get even hints of like conflict, of like, I didn't get along with this person, but then you hear both of those people talking and they both seem like lovely people. So even when there's conflict, it's like it seems to be just like, oh, these two people didn't click, but no one was really doing anything too nefarious. Again, unless this is a documentary that's deliberately sugarcoating things a little bit. So yeah, good flick. And again, appreciate the runtime as well. I think I like the sort of laser focus that it has.
Hey man, just walking down to get my weekly 24 bottles of water now. I think a few things. I think because you're getting people's experiences that obviously went there and had a decent time of it, you're going to get a certain type of slant, but it's a genuine experience as well. So I would feel this movie is very neutral, and then how you feel about the lifestyle yourself is where the slant is going to go. And just talking about an intentional community, these places are called, I believe, sometimes. They're not manufactured. Well, let's just say it is manufactured, like I said. And you said you often thought about this as well, where I could go into the David Fincher movie. I guess it's only manufactured to the point of the first generation who founded it, because once kids are born into that environment, then it is no longer manufactured for them. It's just their life. So I think it only takes one generation before it becomes the norm as well, and maybe 2 or 3 before nobody there knows any type of living, depending on the place, obviously. And just a few points of information for you as well, because I was just doing a little bit of research. The community is still open, and I don't know if this was clear in the documentary or something I missed or something that I presumed, because it's all the old heads talking about it. And it's funny with the old heads as well, even though they're much older, you can feel like there's a lot of life on their faces. They've clocked a lot of miles in. You can see a sparkle and a twinkle in their eye when they talk about the commune, which is brilliant. They really have such life in their faces when they talk about it. In fact, the founder starts crying when he thinks of one experience and how he describes it when a woman got on top of him and fucked his brains out in the middle of the night. So yeah, the commune is still open, and I think it's had more members than it ever did in 2014, 2015, which is pretty cool that it's actually sustained itself over the years. And I was just looking up the Shiva Limas, if that's what they're called, and their founder. What they believed is radical in one way, and obviously this is just what I read online, but they felt that when a child is raised, it shouldn't just have a relationship with its mother. It should have a relationship with loads of people in the community, because that will raise more adjusted people in the future that contribute more to society, and they'll be more well-rounded, more adjusted. And because they've had exposure to a lot of different people essentially raising them rather than their mother, it totally changes their perspective. I think that's a radical idea. I'd love to watch something based on someone who was raised like that to get their thoughts. But yeah, and what else was there? There was something else as well that I've read that I wanted to bring up. Can't really remember, but yeah, there's a few little tidbits for you now, and yeah, probably do a little bit more research about it.
Guys, this has been great being on the pod. Really appreciate it. If people want to know more, they can go to www.communethemovie.com, which will then take you to the website for all my films and a way to contact me if you want to produce a film. I'm doing the third part of the California trilogy, Commune being the first. The second is called Calling All Earthlings, about another counterculture figure, George Van Tassel, who invented the Integratron Dome and in a way was the first counterculture figure by moving to the desert and leaving the city to eventually have contact, allegedly, with aliens and, living with less money and away from everything. And this third part is my most political film, and it's about in Los Angeles. There's a aerial gondola being proposed, and that will take you from downtown LA, Union Station, LA, to the stadium, Dodger Stadium, and help the traffic. And it's 1.2 miles, and it's sustainable. The only problem is it's flying over heads of working class people in Chinatown and right by their windows. And it's probably seems to be a gambit for the development of the stadium without stating so, of the parking lots. Anyway, so great to meet you this way. And let's talk soon. Keep it going. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.